Enjoy a seat at the table and good company, where great conversations and meaningful discussions happen.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiedelholtz. We all know a great dinner party isn't really about the food. It's about the people seated around the table engaging in lively discussions. And Good Company gives you a seat at the table to enjoy smart and interesting conversations as they happen. I am pleased to be in the company of Nikki Fultz, the director of Fort Wayne Pride. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So I want to start with, I think, your background and sort of talking about, obviously, you're a lesbian.
Yep.
And but you use the pronouns she, her, right?
Yep.
So I want to talk a little bit about your background and what it was like, because you've lived in Fort Wayne all of your life.
I have,
You're going to be 40 in
September.
Yeah. So I'm curious what that was like growing up, because you also came out when you were 14.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that process and your family and, staying in Fort Wayne. Just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I always kind of had an inkling that I was different. Even when I was little, like 7 or 8, I told my mom I was going to marry the neighbor girl. So I had an idea. And as I grew and realized, what that was, there wasn't a lot of LGBTQ people around me or on TV or anything. So as I started to figure out what that was, I was really struggling because I was raised in a Lutheran conservative family, and I was taught that it was wrong and things. So I was at push and pull. And my mom finally just asked me one day when I was 14, asked if I was gay, and I told her I was, and she had a hard time with that, even though she had that idea too. So at the beginning, it was hard for my parents and my extended family. I have some extended family who don't approve of who I am. I have other extended family that do, but my parents and my brother are very supportive today, and very quickly, it just took them a little bit of time to get used to, but it definitely worked out for me. So, as being in Fort Wayne and being young, there wasn't a lot of LGBTQ people at my school and, around the area. So,
and even at that time, people really weren't even using LGBTQ.
Oh, no, not at all.
We didn't even understand transgender.
Yeah, exactly. It was just really,
it was really the
lesbian, gay people.
Right.
There wasn't, and that was a lot of the fear of my parents was, my mom especially, her stereotypes, what she thought about gay people was negative, because that's all she had ever seen, and she didn't think I'd be able to have a happy life, and so she was really worried more about that. And so being somebody that was out, I was very lucky. I had some accepting friends, and I didn't really get a lot of the bullying at school. I know that a lot of people do and did, but because of that, I think it pushed me to go outside of my peer group, and I met a lot of people who were in their 30s and early 40s, and they connected me to the community. And so I started going to there's a lesbian support group at the Women's Bureau, and it was mostly these older women, and I was there.
So Harriet Miller and
Monica. I do. I don't know them super well, but I know them.
Yeah.
And so just connecting to some of these people in the community who at that time I felt like were old. They're younger than I am now, but and that got me involved in Pride. So I met Lori Hilke and her wife Robin, and Lori was the head of Pride at that time, and her wife and I were at a fundraiser, and Robin had invited me to come to a Pride meeting to meet people, and then I started getting involved that way. So I think because of the timing, I think there wasn't a lot of, I think it's harder as a teenager normally to get involved in organizations like I did, but because of the timing and how things worked, it really did happen.
And at the time when you came out, a lot of youth that I've talked to, especially if they're transgender, they felt like they never saw anyone like them until the internet.
Yeah.
And so when you were sort of trying to figure out and how you were different and why you were different, did you look to the internet as well, or did you?
There wasn't a lot of internet availability.
Okay.
It was a bit of that. It was a lot of stuff like, what's happening in pop culture. As I got to be a teenager, luckily I worked at a gas station actually, and I met some lesbians through that and and that was another way I connected to the community as well. And so it was more of just random happenstance that things happened. I mean, I was lucky And I know that I could have felt a lot more isolated and stuff, but it just worked out that I was willing to put myself out there a little bit,
Right.
And then meet the right people.
And I think the key was also that although, what was it that your mother, probably when you were little, like when you were 7 and said you're going to marry the girl next door,
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of like when boys say they want to marry their moms. I mean,
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
a chuckle. So what was it that she sort of, I mean, she was very in tune to you, obviously.
Yeah.
What was it that she sort of thought or...
I think because I was a tomboy, I mean, I was very much, and that was just that, that
Stereotype,
stereotype. And I don't know if she really thought I would say yes, but I think, it just happened. I don't even remember the conversation of what was going on. I just remember that we were having this conversation and she blurted it out and I answered and then she cried because she didn't expect that to be the case.
Right.
And I know that, as I've gotten older and as I've been able to talk to her, I've realized especially at that time it was scary, and she thought a lot of the stereotypes was like this, the sexualization of gay and lesbian people, and where are you going to be, and
Right.
and how are you going to be able, you're never going to have kids, you're never going to be able to be married, and all these things.
Well, you sort of feel like your job as a parent is to eliminate barriers and things that will make it hard for your children.
Yeah.
And so what she sort of felt was like, you're just putting something on yourself that's hard. But I don't believe it's a choice. I mean, I just think it's, like I was talking to a transgender male, and, the way he described it and how uncomfortable he was in his body and what he is going through to get surgery. And
Oh, yeah.
to me, I'm like, this is not a choice.
Yeah.
I mean, because it is, and also with, I didn't realize like with transgender, like your insurance company won't pay for surgeries, and then they require you to go through therapy for a year, and you have to pay for all that.
Yeah.
And I just think so, because I do think you see it from the time kids are little.
Quite often, yeah. I mean, and I don't think it's choice either. Obviously, it's just as natural to me. This is who I am,
Right.
And that's why I try to tell people it's hard if you're not in that situation, except to think like, what if somebody said you had to love somebody of the same sex and you don't, you're not attracted to that person, or not having any desire for that.
Right.
And so I think it obviously my life has had obstacles in the way because of it. I've also had positive things because obviously I've found a great community and been able to be involved in a lot of things that I wouldn't have been involved in if I was heterosexual.
You were able to get married.
Yeah, and we were able to be at, we were at the Supreme Court when the decision came down in 2013, and we've been able to have kids and all these things. So I recognize, I'm in a place of privilege too. So, and I recognize there's not everybody has that,
Right.
but I do see that this is more and more common for same-sex couples to be able to have a quote-unquote normal life if they want that. So
I think that you made a really great point, and so I want to go back when you said, and I don't think that this is perfect for heterosexual couples, is to think about what if you had to marry someone of the same, like you're forced to marry someone of the same, and you're not attracted to them and you don't want that. I think that's really an incredible way to think about really understanding how putting yourself in someone else's shoes.
Definitely.
And I think that's really, I don't think most people would think about that, but it does. It's sort of like, yeah, of course,
Yeah, it would be uncomfortable, and you're lying to that person.
Right.
I mean,
and you're lying to
you
yourself.
would probably care. I mean, there's a lot of people who are gay and lesbian who have been in heterosexual marriages, especially because it used to be the common.
Well, that was true for Monica and Harriet.
Yeah.
They were both married.
And so then you feel like you're lying to the person you do care about. Like, you might be married to them, you might very love them and care about them, but it's not the same as what it would be otherwise. And so I think that's the other part is why would you want to put somebody else through that and make them think that you're wanting to be with them when you really have other desires.
So tell me a little bit about Fort Wayne Pride. Obviously, your big annual event is Fort Wayne Pride Fest, which is going to be July 23rd and 24th.
Yep.
But explain how Pride Fest fits into the overall entity of Fort Wayne Pride.
So we used to be a part of a community center, Up the Stairs Community Center, and then in 2005 we broke off and formed our own nonprofit. And so when we started it, it really was focused on the festival. And we did some other events and stuff, but as Fort Wayne's LGBTQ community has grown, as we have had more resources available for the organization, we've been able to expand to do year-round events. So one of the goals, we're an educational nonprofit, so we're always trying to make sure people have resources and things that they need. But we also want to make sure people have those connections to the community outside of just the couple days. We know that people crave being able to be in a space that they're accepted and safe and welcomed. And so when we can give those opportunities more than once a year, it's great. So that's how we really started, was starting to do those extra events. And we've kind of played with stuff like what works, what doesn't. And we found some things that really work. And then sometimes it depends year to year. And then our website has been a great tool for people because we have a resource directory of LGBTQ specific and just things that would be accepting or useful for our community, for nonprofits and businesses. And people contact our website quite often looking for help. I had a month ago a teenager was kicked out of their home still for being gay, and they're looking for help.
It's one of the
sometimes people
largest,
in crisis. I mean, and so being able to get them into contact with resources, if possible, just connect to things if people need it, has been great. And then we have expanded too into the giving back. So we recognize one of the things when I started with Pride was.
And when was that?
We've probably been doing the giving back stuff for, I'd say, about 7 years or so.
Okay.
So when I started with Pride, one of the things I found frustrating was, as a smaller Pride festival, we weren't able to get access to the financial support of other, that larger festivals did. And it got very, very frustrating for me because, there was times I personally had to give a loan to Pride for us to put the festival on early on. And that was back when I was a college student that didn't have a lot of money. So that was something that I vowed that one day, if we were in the able to help others, that I would like to do that. And so we've been able to help a couple other Pride festivals get, they're going financially. And then we also have helped the Positive Resource Connection, which is the HIV Education and Prevention Center here in Fort Wayne. We help every now and then stock their food pantry there. And then we've been able to help families at Christmas time, at holiday time. And so that's been really fun.
And in the past, you've also been able to give scholarships.
And so that was on hold due to COVID and issues with trying to get the information to students, but bringing that back next year for sure.
And then you also do an interesting program with training, both with the Fort Wayne Police and then also with companies and organizations. How does that work with the Fort Wayne Police Department?
So I was contacted probably 4 or 5 years ago. Mitch McKinney, who is one of the officers there at Fort Wayne, had contacted me because he was he's in charge of recruit training at that time. And they did a diversity day of bringing in different people to understand backgrounds. And so he had asked if I would come do recruit training for LGBTQ stuff. And I did, and it went really well. So I continued to do that. That has evolved, and I've been meeting with other LGBTQ leaders locally. We meet with the police department every month or every couple months.
Is that more for recruiting LGBTQ police officers, or is it to talk about the relations between the police and the community?
More for the relations part of it. So how can we bridge the gap, because there are issues. There's a history of mistreatment by the law enforcement of the LGBTQ community, so there's a mistrust. And so how can we build that back? Are there any issues that we're seeing? So we did find some things that through some of the programs that other people were part of, where they saw some just how domestic violence situations, how they could be handled differently. But also that sometimes people saw that things were happening, they thought that it was because they were gay or lesbian or trans, and really it was just, that's the police, that's the policy. And so maybe making that more clear for people so they realize this isn't because of this. And part of that is if you're going in and asking pronouns or treating people respectfully, using the right terminology, then all of a sudden that's what we've talked about, is just decreasing their guard. They're not going to think that's the reason if you're treating them in that respectful way. And so that has led to a partnership with Adams County Sheriff's Department. I just did some training there for a couple, 2 different trainings for all their officers and jailers. And then that's working now. Right after Pride, I'm going to be doing a presentation for the Indiana Law Enforcement Association for sheriffs and leaders across the state, and getting them some training.
And what are some of the things that they have perception or stereotype in what you present? What are some of the things that you see?
Well, a lot of it, I give a lot of information just on, like I said, terminology and how to respectfully talk to people, differences of, between what's gender, what's sexuality. I answer a lot of questions, but most of the time they're there to listen. They'll sometimes ask some questions, but a lot of it is we give. It was a 2-hour presentation, so I try to give a lot of information.
Right.
There's a lot of there's some videos with scenarios and things to help them, especially with transgender people. If you're needing to search somebody or transport somebody, jailing, all that kind of stuff. There's policies that are in place from the Department of Justice to make sure that we're not having any assaults or things like that in prison.
And how is the recruitment for the police force and the interaction of policemen? Who are they accepting of having LGBTQ members, and is that a big effort or concentration that they're trying to get that kind of diversity on the force?
Yeah, and there's already some gay and lesbian officers that are part of the force, bisexual I'm sure too, that are part of the force, and they're hoping to just do more recruitment in general of diversity, like making sure that the police department reflects what our community looks like. So it's not just our community, it's community of color as well. So yeah, they're actively, they're planning on having a booth at Pride and, really trying to get some people to join.
How big is the LGBTQ community in Fort Wayne, would you say?
It's hard to know for sure. We've never really had a real study done, and that the census in 2010 in 2020 was supposed to have that, and then they took that out, and so that was super frustrating because that was a big hope that that we'd have that big idea. So we know there's any estimates 5-10%. It really depends, especially if you're looking at the spectrum of sexuality and gender. And now I think it's even more because people are accepted, so. People are more willing to come out and be their authentic selves.
But I think there's a little confusion now in some ways. So one of the things is that I have found with millennials and younger people that their sexuality is non-binary. Like they love who they love.
Yeah, a lot of pansexual young people.
So one, they could have a relationship with a woman, and then they could have a relationship with a man, and so when I was talking to someone, I really wanted to say, I wanted to see if I could fix them up, but then I realized, I needed to ask them, you can't just assume that they, so you have to sort of ask them. So I think that's a little confusing for people to understand that versus like transgender. The understanding that your sexuality has nothing to do with your gender.
Yeah.
But I just think because it is so, the fluidity for millennials, and they have no problem, like telling you, who they like or what they like. Or
they don't want to label.
Right, right. Yeah. So I think that's a little confusing for people, like how to understand that.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I think, I know that, and you do a drag show at the Pride. I think there's a little confusion there too, because some people think that that's like entertainment, that they, that men, just like women, or if you watch the movie Victoria, she was a woman impersonating a man, impersonating a woman. But so you think that that's entertainment, and that those are drag queens, but then you have some
trans people who are also performing.
So it's very confusing. So how do you sort of help the heterosexual community to sort of try to understand or navigate all of this, because you want to be mindful and thoughtful and understanding, but it's really, it's very confusing.
It can be, yeah. So I think number one is always, ask questions as long as you're not being super invasive. Right. I think that is important, and I've always pushed people. I'd rather people ask questions and get to know, and this is the type of things I love, because I think, dispelling some of that stuff and also just opening up. I would say for millennials, I think that in general, they're kind of, they don't feel like they have to be held down by a certain standard for a lot of things. Right. I think now maybe as people get older, there might be some changing as, they grow up and kind of figure out things, but I think that that's the beauty of right now is it's not like everybody has to act this way, everybody has to be this way. And so there's a lot more fluidity in sexuality and in gender. And so as people are going through, I think more and more people are identifying as pansexual, which instead of bisexual, where it's binary, so male, female, I'm attracted to both. Pansexual acknowledges that there's a lot of stuff in between male and female.
Let's just,
yeah.
So bisexual means so bisexual. So I'm a woman, right? So bisexual means that I would be attracted to women and men.
Correct.
Correct.
And that's the term that has always been used.
Okay.
But quite often.
Okay.
But I think the newer term pansexual acknowledges that we're not just looking at men and women.
Right.
There's people on the spectrum of non-binary.
Right.
So I'm not really worried about identifying as being attracted to men or women. I'm just saying I'm attracted to people.
You love who you love.
Different people.
Right. So that really what that also sort of puts in that pansexual is like if somebody's transgender, that's really because you may, or
some trans people wouldn't necessarily identify.
Right. Or some of them don't even identify as, like in this case of this gentleman, I mean, he doesn't identify as gay. I mean, he's attracted to women.
Yeah.
So it is very, but I mean, so I don't think that, I mean, in some ways, I don't think it's not that people mean to be, obtuse or not sensitive, but it's very confusing.
Yeah.
And now, like I sort of, as a writer, I sort of am mindful because, if I'm talking about people in general, and I'll say, the person for this job, needs this skill. He, she, and now all of a sudden, because that's how you
they.
Right? You got your he, she, they.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering why that's so important. Like, I mean, I believe words matter. So, what does that give? Like, I had Mitch Stein from Pond on, and the first thing he did, he sat down and he told me, he's gay and these are my pronouns, and I was like, okay. Like, like you're sort of setting the tone. Is that what it does, or makes people make sure they're seen, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think that, and I think, like if somebody continually referred to me with he, him pronouns, that would be like, I would find that offensive, and I'd be like, you're not seeing who I am.
Right.
And so I think that's the same with the they, them pronouns. So what that entails is I'm not identifying, I'm not he, I'm not she, I'm they, I'm non-binary, I'm not going along the spectrum, or I'm not going to the binary, I'm going to the spectrum in between. Right. And so, and some people are pretty fluid with that. They might use, they, them, or she, her, or he, him. And so I think just, you may not always understand it, but I think it's important for us as people just to be respectful of others. And just because I don't understand something, there's religions I don't understand, but I'm fine with people, practicing and believing in whatever they want to do. I can acknowledge that. I can be respectful of that. And so I think that's how I look at a lot of things. It's like, I'm not expected to know everything and understand everything, but I think we still have to have that common courtesy as a people to respect others.
I think people of the LGBTQ community should also be courteous that when someone's asking them a question, like they're not judging you. They're really trying to understand, like
definitely
why and sort of just, but I think your idea of just think about if you had to, I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
But so how do you think, because there was a study a couple of years ago, like 2 years ago, that Fort Wayne wasn't so good in reaching out or being inclusive or accepting of the LGBTQ community. And you seem to be, and I talked to you about that at that time, but you seem to be a little bit more positive now. Or no? I mean, is it better? How is Fort Wayne doing?
I think that there's positions and things that are supposed to be in place in order to get a better score. We don't have those. I think.
Like what? What are the things that Fort Wayne needs to
liaisons have? In the police department specifically.
But you're working on that.
We're not a formal one, but we're working on that. Having liaison with the mayor's office, having non-discrimination policies all the way in place. That's the kind of stuff that they look for.
Right.
I will say, like, I don't feel like I'm getting the same complaints I used to about people being fired for being LGBTQ. That was something I definitely had a lot more 5+ years ago. I'd get a lot more of those. I don't hardly get those anymore. We still are lacking in resources just in general for the community. We just don't have, we don't have a community center. Some places do. We don't have a lot of specific LGBTQ programming all the way through, but part of that is, my theory is when you're in a larger city, people maybe find acceptance more and don't have to have that specific programming. So, a lot of the cities that have
get lost.
Yeah, a lot of the cities that have community centers are smaller cities,
or maybe very big cities.
Yeah, or really large cities. So we're kind of in that in between where we don't have the financial resources maybe to support it, but also it's not, you don't have the people coming to that stuff as often either. Even some of our events that I would hope, people would come to aren't as well attended as what they could be, but we have one gay bar too in a city of 300,000 people.
What gay bar is
After Dark is the only gay bar left, and so in a city of 300,000 we only have one gay bar. Well, because people are able to go to other bars, which isn't the case years ago when we had 5 or 6.
Right. And then also there's what I thought is interesting is, are we doing a disservice to lesbians, gay, transgender when we sort of group you all together? Because several gay men told me about Pride Fest. They said, well, that's really like the lesbians do that, and it's more like lesbian, the music, the type of music. And I was like, really, So I'm just wondering, is that good or bad that to see you all as one community, or should we also understand that there are nuances, or are there, just like with religious organizations, is there issues like I didn't know there was conflict between, gay,
There's always going to be people who maybe it isn't their cup of tea for. I think though there is still an importance of LGBTQ centered events.
And just let's go over. So it's lesbian,
gay, bisexual, transgender, queer. And some people are still offended by queer, especially older folks, because they were used as
but the idea there was to take
back
ownership of a bad word and turn it. And
correct,
queer,
and it's more of an all-encompassing term.
Right, isn't that what, now when you say queer, what does that mean in terms of who would define themselves as queer?
All different people, so it could be really any age level. It's really just, I'm not falling under the heterosexual norm somewhere outside of that. And so it could be also in gender too, that they're queer. And so I think it is important still to have these events. And we, we recognize that we can't make it perfect for everybody. We've always been open to things, and we have a lot of different people attend our festival if you've ever been. So, there's going to be still people that are naysayers. I just was
surprised. I was like...
Yeah, and I think...
But that's like
overall,
Lilith Fair, there's
we're definitely not that extreme of Lilith Fair. But we do find that it's easier to find. We found a lot of local performers. We try to focus on some local performers. Some are straight allies. Many are LGBTQ. We find people regionally, and then we've tried to add a lot of stuff onto the festival to try to make it more, exciting for everybody.
Like you have a kids space.
We do have workshops.
Then you have vendors
and
like
nonprofits.
You said, the police department's going to be there.
And we have a community stage, and we also have our main stage. So we try to do a couple different stages this year to make sure people have different things to see and different places to go.
So one of the things I really want to take a look at with you is, because Fort Wayne is the city of churches, and it is a bit more conservative in that sense. The issue really facing youth, and like you talked about the teen who was a crisis because they get thrown out of the house. I mean, a huge problem of homelessness is with teens and LGBTQ, and also that they have still a very high suicide rate. So tell me about what causes that and what can be done, or how are there programs like or communities that help parents, and it's like if you have a child of or like did your mom go to, because she wouldn't tell, probably initially she probably wouldn't tell her church friends, so she probably didn't know what to do.
She didn't,
And was your dad in the home as well? Yeah. And so also, how did he take it? I mean, what was that?
He was a little bit more understanding. He came to Pride a little sooner than my mom did, but he also struggled some. But in his family is actually the one that's not as accepting. But both my parents have been great about who I am. But today, there's a couple places families can go to. So we have a local PFLAG chapter.
And PFLAG is?
Parents, friends, family of lesbians and gays. And that's been around since, I think, the 70s.
Right. And then we have the Center for Nonviolence.
And then the Center for Nonviolence. So the Center for Nonviolence has a youth group program, but they also have resources for families. And they try to connect people with things that they need, and they're really good about that. So we have both of those, I think, which are really substantial.
Right. But do we have like a youth homeless center, or do we have a place for? I mean, and I don't think parents really realize what they're doing.
Yeah.
When they throw their kid out because they can't, maybe their aunts and uncles won't take them. So do we have like anything like that, like a youth homeless shelter, or is there somewhere for that these kids can go? Or
most of them would go into foster care, and so then that's where they end up unless they stay on the streets. Then that would be their other option. Right. There isn't really a youth homeless center, and LGBTQ youth are at much higher rates of, like you said, suicide and homelessness, mental health issues, addiction, even into adulthood. Right. And a lot of that comes from rejection. When we look at like why are they having these problems, besides homelessness, obviously it is rejection, but those other problems really stem from rejection from the community. So they're like 8 times more likely to attempt suicide if your family's not accepting of you. And so I think one of the things to understand is if I'm a minority in other ways, religious or racial ethnic minority, my people at home are still the same usually. And so you still have that community at home. You still have the place to go to, your home base that's safe. When you're LGBTQ, that's not the case normally. You don't normally have somebody at home who would be part of that. And so then you're really isolated in that way. So if you don't have outside connections, outside support, then that really amplifies that. And especially if it's negative, if you're getting bullied and there's still kids who are being bullied and taking their lives because of being gay.
Right. Well, think about it. So I'm also really curious. So you and your wife, were you together before you were able to get married, or?
We were together. Yeah, we were together since 2006.
And so, you both had adopted or through the foster care. You have three girls.
Three girls who were 26.
And so, so when they were little and they were in school, and so you think they're 26 now, so 20 years ago, and people would say about bring this home to your mom and dad, or how did you help them in school understand that they have 2 moms, or how did you talk to the teachers? Because I think that was just the start of a little bit more of the sensitivity, and books were coming out about Sally has 2 mommies and kinds of things.
Yeah, well, our girls didn't come to us till middle and high school. They all came at different times. But
and were they also LGBTQ or no?
There's 2 of our daughters identify LGBTQ, but that wasn't. I mean, they were younger.
That wasn't like, and that wasn't it. Was that when you were considering being foster parents? Was that important to you, or no? You just wanted to?
Not at all. Actually, when we started fostering, we thought we were going to foster babies and little ones.
And then
one of our friends was at a place locally, a residential center with a lot of kids there that needed homes, and she had said something about this girl that she thought, she'd work really well. She's just a sweet kid, and so that was Caitlin. And Caitlin came to live with us when she was in middle school, and so. That was once we took Caitlin, then the foster care system was like, hey, we got some other teenagers too.
But what was it like at the time of being, so you were married then, right? Were you married at the time?
It wouldn't have been legally married. I mean, like we had a ceremony in 2007. We were married through our church.
Okay, but you weren't.
But it wasn't legally recognized.
So what was that like? Was within the foster care system? Because like in the state of Florida, they still, it's very difficult for same-sex couples to adopt children. Yeah. So what was that like going through the foster care system, and what was that process like?
Well, we looked at other adoption options, which were like religious-based and locally, and that wasn't going to work out for us. So that's why we went through foster care with DCS. And it was DCS? very, very accepting. Yeah, we never had one problem in that regard. And so our kids... because they had come from various backgrounds of trauma and stuff, I think they were, I would say, I'm going to speak for them, they were very happy and felt safe and welcome in our home. And they very much defended our family if somebody would say something, but it didn't really happen very often. Our son now, he's in school, he's going in 4th grade. And every now and then kids might say something about a dad, and he'll just say, I have 2 moms. And I teach at the same school he's at, so that might help a little bit.
And are there more, is he seeing more children in his class that also are, have 2 dads? It's so, the interblending of families with divorce and another stepmoms, and so it's all confusing, but are they seeing it more? And then obviously now there's television shows that show 2 moms or 2 dads, and there's books, and so they can see it more. Yeah. But is there more of a awareness with kids?
Oh, I think so,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, I have friends who had kids, 20 years ago,
Right.
same-sex couples, and so what they experience versus now, it's much better. I would
Like
say.
I remember when I was in elementary school, we were the first generation parents got divorced.
Oh, okay.
So when you would go home, my mom would say, "Oh, well, who's getting?" Because it was like 50% of the people were getting divorced.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
So that was really like in the 70s. That was the first time everybody, really got divorced.
Okay.
So it was the same thing. And so at first and then you're like, well, 90% of the kids in your
it's
class are divorced.
No, it's just the common thing. Yeah. So I would say and even as a teacher, I've noticed more and more same-sex couples that have kids at school. Whereas when I first started teaching, that wasn't really something I ever saw.
And then you teach at a middle school?
Elementary.
In elementary. So do they also, are there other gay and lesbian teachers on the faculty that are open?
Not at my school right now, but there are throughout our district, though.
Now, do the students just like when Mitch was here, he told me, I'm gay, these are my pronouns. So what grade do you teach?
Third grade.
Okay, so maybe it's not appropriate, but I don't know. But
the kids know I have a wife, and they know we have kids. Kids and people say, I share your personal information. Every coworker I have talks about their spouse.
Right.
Kids are like super inquisitive and want to know about you. And you're like, one of the things about being a teacher is you are really forming a relationship.
Right.
And so kids they want to know about you. You get to know about them. It's not something this huge deal about our class. And I've actually, when at the beginning, I every now and then would have some negative stuff, but recently, not at all. And kids kind of know. I mean, they're like, oh yeah, I have an uncle who's gay or whatever.
Right.
It's never really this big, huge announcement.
Yeah, but I also meant that then for kids who aren't sure or feeling uncomfortable or just know maybe there's something different, that it gives them also someone maybe to talk to. Or, because I would not suggest that for youth, especially, to just, when a parent, just blurt it out and know, now I think you got to set it up a little bit. Yeah. Maybe, you help coach a youth if they're going to come out to their parents and, sort of, because there is, I don't think parents, their first reaction, they just drop this bomb and then the kid doesn't get this big hug. And it's not because necessarily the parent doesn't want to accept it. It's like the parent has to process this whole thing.
Yeah, it's everything you thought for your kids. You have an idea of what your kids are going to do, and I think it's that.
But now
change of that.
But now that you can get married and you can have kids, and but the other thing I thought was interesting was you have the 3 older girls, and now you actually became a grandmother, which I don't understand. You're too young for that. And then you have 2 younger kids.
Yeah.
But then you talked about that your son Tegan, right? You had to adopt him.
Yeah,
your wife carried him.
My wife carried him, yeah. So we had a donor, and my wife carried him. And that was before marriage was legal in Indiana. So, and actually even in the United States. He was born in 2012. So in order for me to have any legal protection, I had to have a second parent adoption. So that was a long process, a lot of work, money. And then right when he was born, I wasn't legally recognized. So if something had happened to my wife, that would have been a problem. So we had to have some stuff in place for that.
Do you still have to do that today now that you're legally married?
So today, you automatically go on the birth certificate today, but I still did for our daughter, I still did the second parent adoption, which it was more of like it's a legal protection though, because there can still be a challenge, and it's best to just make sure you protect. Based on legal opinions and stuff, that's what we did, but it's significantly cheaper, very little paperwork because we're legally married.
Right.
We conceived, we planned her together, everything is together. And so it's a lot different than with Tegan because, there was no legal stuff in place.
The other thing I was thinking about is because in our past administration, there were certain rules about the gays and lesbians in the military that they, changed. And then there was talk about wanting to revoke, although they can't because it's the Supreme Court. But I was thinking isn't that really sort of frustrating and aggravating that you're not, I don't mean to say this as coyly, but you're at the whim of the administration of which was going to be there, your rights, and because it used to be that you could be fired. I mean, it could
just recently until last summer,
until last summer, right, in Indiana, right? That
then, and a lot of states,
that you could, and then there. So, how does that make you feel? That because no one ever thinks that the state of marriage is going to be revoked. Maybe in an apocalypse after that, nobody can get married or something. But how does that make you feel? That I just felt that would really anger me, that a lot of my, how I want to live and the choices, and if I want to join the military, and, what is
so that's one of the reasons I had to adopt Riley, because there actually was talk that it was going to be challenged. Our Indiana government was challenging that. The Supreme Court didn't take it up, but that was what it was looking.
Right.
And so Indiana has been trying to actively get rid of the allowance of us being able to go on birth certificate. Right. So, that was one of the reasons. And it is frustrating. And I always say, like, sometimes I forget that I am in this minority, not always protected group, because like I said, I live a pretty privileged life, and I can go about day to day, and every now and then I'm reminded. I know that some people don't, they're reminded over and over again.
Especially, I think, when you're transgender.
Transgender, for sure.
That's very more.
Yeah, and I think it is, waiting for these lawsuits, or is the Supreme Court going to take up a bathroom bill, or are they going to talk about athletes? And so I think it is hard to have your rights decided, and like you said, they can be changed, and there is constant pushes, to change it, and people trying to whittle away as much as they can at what marriage looks like for same-sex couples.
And do you think that so Indiana, being a very Republican state, is not friendly to lots of groups? So I'm curious that you have lived here all your life, like, why wouldn't you move to a bigger city or a state that you, like California or, New York or somewhere where these things aren't going to be challenged? I mean, because if they're federal, they're not going to be challenged on the state level. But even that states that are more friendly, why do you stay here then?
I get that question sometimes, and I always say the same thing, because if I left, who's gonna make this a little bit more welcoming for other people? So I think it's important. I mean, some people can't stay. They feel like they have to leave, and I get that. But for me, I felt like, being a blue dot in a red state type of idea of, how am I going to make change if I leave? And there's going to be young people coming out, and they need that. I've had several former students who have come to me, and they're out now, and they've said, I really appreciate, like, you, and just like you making me realize, like, I could just be myself, and I didn't have to have as much of a struggle as I might have otherwise. And so I think it's important still to have, people who have differing opinions, because if everybody's the same everywhere you go, you're never going to have any change, because there is a place in the middle too that we can meet sometimes.
And I think that the truth is no matter who you are, no matter what your political, gender, sexual, preferences, socioeconomic, the fundamental is that everybody wants to be accepted. They want to be made to feel important, and they want to be loved. I mean, at the end of the day, that's all what we're, and so how important is that building of community? Like, one of the things that I've said when I first started coming to Fort Wayne, and everybody's telling me about the African American community, and I was like, okay, well, where is it? Like, where could I go? Like, is there restaurants? Are there, a district? Or like in Chicago, I mean, I live, now they're not going to talk about it. They don't want to say it's called Boys Town anymore. Yeah. But I lived in Lakeview, so we were between Boys Town and Girls Town. So I knew, like, where to go, like where the communities are. But, and then everybody with the African American community, they would say, well, it's all over the place. Like, so is there, like, because you don't have a community center, which I argue you need that sense of place where people can come together and be empowered and work from, and, know that other people are doing the same things. And so is there a place, or how do you all, like, or is it like just Pride Fest is when, we see...
there really isn't a place. I think, we've talked about trying to do something with Pride, like opening a Pride Center. It just takes a lot of financial resources and time and things.
Right.
But I think we don't really have like a centralized space. I mean, there's West Central has quite a few LGBTQ people living there. As I go through downtown, I see, businesses all around that have LGBTQ people working and things, but there's not really a gathering place besides events that we try to host. Obviously, I said, like, we have a gay bar.
Or maybe could the Center for Nonviolence, could that be more of a...
I think they have a lot of, because they do a lot of domestic violence stuff. I mean, they have a lot of other things they do. IPFW has the Q Center, Resource Center. Right. And some of the, like, I know a lot of high schools are having GSAs and stuff, but there's not really one centralized place.
But I think that I've been doing a lot of research of this idea of identity, culture, community, and that they're different. But I do think you need a community. I mean, that's why, if you think about it, why religion has churches and synagogues and mosques, because you have a gathering place. And from that, then you can also see the numbers in strength.
I can definitely see that,
for the African American community. I think they need, hopefully now the Urban League with that campus will become that place. But, they want it also to be for everybody. Because the Urban League's message is not just for African Americans, supporting anybody, minorities, Yeah. But I just feel like that's really important. Because you can't, like when I ask you, how big is the community? I don't know.
We don't know. Yeah, we don't know.
And I also wonder, this is just me thinking, well, if I was a lesbian or gay, where would I go, to meet people?
That's one of the questions people will contact me. There's some of the sports leagues, like Turner's has a softball night Thursdays where a lot of, I know a lot of lesbians go to. A lot of it though is, people knowing people, and that's where you do have people fall through the cracks because you don't have, because you don't always have that. And then when we had the community center, which has went under, but when we did have a LGBTQ community center, that was a place for a lot of those people who maybe didn't have the connections or didn't have the clicks. Because I know there are, there's groups all over Fort Wayne. And so if you're not part of that group, it would be hard to get into. And if you're not willing to go, to the bar because maybe you're too young, maybe you don't want to drink or whatever it is, then you would have, miss out on some of that long time stuff. And that's one of the things why we were trying to do year-round stuff is just to make sure that, every month somebody had a place to go if they wanted. And we do have a lot of, people that are, from all different types of backgrounds that show up.
And how do you think the philanthropic community and also the business community, because like for Pride Fest, you need them to support it.
Yeah.
How are they? Do you feel that that's continual? They're positive, it's growing? Do you think that you could get a grant or something to create this community center? Do you think you could get the support? What's the business community and the philanthropic community like?
I would say our business community has definitely grown in support significantly since we started. We have sponsors now.
How many corporate sponsors do you have now?
I think we have 12, I think.
And now it's like a badge of honor to be saying that
sometimes people in our community still are against that idea of corporations coming into Pride because they think it should be what it was originally. Pride was, a protest against mistreatment and, to stand up. But I think one of the things people don't realize is it costs a lot of money to put on a festival.
And you only charge, I said, you
$5. Yeah, we try to keep it reasonable. Yeah.
Right.
And so because of that, we do have to offset the costs in different ways. And so getting, grants and donors and things like that is very helpful. And in the fact of a community center, yes, I think we could get some support that way. It just takes finding, that dedicated group of people who would be willing to do it. The festival right now, I'm working, I volunteer, this is all volunteer, and I'm probably at 40 to 50 hours a week, and we're still a few weeks away from the festival. Making sure that we can sustain something, we have enough volunteers that would be willing to put the time in, and also finding a place. That's been another issue, is I've been trying to find a location that's affordable enough.
Like in the seed, in all these opportunity
Definitely,
zones.
Yeah. So
I think they would, or even Southeast. They're really working to try with the landlords and developers who have empty spaces.
Yeah, for sure. So with COVID, that was kind of we had started 2019 was really a big time where we started really looking at doing that. And then COVID obviously happened. And then with this year, with the uncertainty, we kind of put stuff on hold. So that was on our board meeting to start for next year. So I'm hoping soon, because I think it'd be nice for us to have a place for people and a place for just operations and just
and also for people, families and
and just so people knew where to go to get resources. Kind of like if you come to Fort Wayne, you can go to the Visitors Bureau, then you have there's the,
or you can go to a church.
There's the Pride Center. Yeah.
What about the idea that since we're saying Southeast, I know that how being gay in the African American Black community is perceived. It's very difficult. How is it being? What is the Is there diversity within? This sounds strange because you are a diverse group, but based on race, do you see that, or do you find that it is still really difficult? Let's say, obviously, if you're Lutheran or Catholic or Christian, that would be hard, from your growing up that way. But do you also find that there are? How is it within other minorities, with Hispanics or Muslims or the Black community?
Yeah, so we've definitely seen that's an issue. Like, it's an ongoing issue that we've tried to make sure that we are finding ways to make sure everybody feels safe and connected, and that they feel like that is a space for them. And so that has always been at the forefront of our thoughts of when we're planning things. We do find that there is definitely not the diversity that we'd like to see racially in our events.
But that's not because the events aren't welcoming. It's also partly because of the perception within the Black community.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I just heard more about being for gay men. I don't know if it's easier for lesbians.
I think
don't
it's
know.
just in general, yeah. And obviously that's changing with people of color. I think in Hispanic communities too, I think it's the same, has had the history of the same thing. And I think it is changing. So I think because we're in a conservative city and things, that does maybe affect how people are either out, or maybe they don't want to go to public events or things like that because they don't want to be seen on TV or other people see them walking by or whatever. But I do still think that we have work to do to make sure that, it is a welcoming place and people feel like they have a space. Like you talked about the guys that you were talking to, we're always open to suggestions, like what can we do to make you feel like this is a space that you'd want to come to. And I think in the end there's going to be people that just won't do it because it's not their cup of tea, but that's how it is for everything. We have the Three Rivers Festival going on right now, and a lot of people in Fort Wayne love that, and some people are like, no, I'm not going near it. So I think that we can just only do our best, and hopefully people recognize and give us grace that we are all volunteer. And we spend a lot of time trying to put on the event. I think a lot of people don't realize how much time goes into events, and all the things that you see there all took time, and that's what
planning. Even like you probably give yourself the 25th off, and then you got to start again.
Not even the 25th. We have to clean up on the 25th. So So we take a few weeks right after the festival, after we get our cleanup and everything. We take a little bit of time, try to debrief, and then get back into it.
And one of the things I'm curious about is, so you grew up, you said, in a Lutheran household, and then you said that you and your wife had a religious sort of. So I'm wondering, and partly your mother's issues of being able to reconcile you being lesbian was because of her faith, right? So where did you find your faith, and how did you reconcile it, and what kind of church and practice of faith do you have, or religion do you have now?
Yeah, so we're part of United Church of Christ, Plymouth, and actually Fort Wayne has, because we're the city of churches, we also have a lot of open and affirming churches. That's something on our website.
And affirming churches.
Open and affirming means that they are not just like LGBTQ people can come here, but we also are affirming of your identity.
So that they would...
Not trying to change you, not trying to tell you you're sinning, like this, there's, I'm not going to get into all the Bible, but there's a lot of different interpretations of the Bible you can
But they
look
would
at.
then also officiate a same-sex marriage or...
union. And so now they will do marriages, but back when we got married, it wasn't, there was no marriage, so they did a union. But that was something, I think, both my wife and I are religious. She went to Huntington College, so a university, so that was a religious school.
Although I interviewed Dr. Sherilyn Emberton for this show, and I was really impressed and about how they are open and that people are going to challenge their faith and want to ask questions. And then I actually, 2 summers ago, I was in Promenade Park, and they're big in their film, and there was a group of kids, doing their filming, and there was clearly a woman who was a lesbian, and I was asking her, how did you feel, at Huntington? And she said she felt very welcome and very,
Yeah, they've changed a lot, because when she was there, she actually wasn't allowed to be gay.
Openly.
So that was, they've been really shifting. I think they're really pushing into so that's great. So I think we both were religious, and that was something that we still wanted to continue. But I had a struggle, because I think sometimes you, as an LGBTQ person, you feel like there's it's an us versus them, because that's the side that keeps attacking who you are and attacking your rights. And so it's that coming to the idea of it's not everybody, it's not the religion, it's the people that are in the religion.
Or the interpretation of the religion.
and so that finding an open and affirming church, we were going to visit several of them, and then we went to Plymouth, and we were like, yeah, this is where we want to be. So you went church shopping. We were going to, and then we just liked the first one, and the people there have been super amazing.
And so if you could tell the whole community, what is it that we should know or we could do, or what do you wish, sort of that the two things that we could all do?
I wish, number one, that we just come to more of an understanding and acceptance of different people, LGBTQ people, but also just everybody in general. I think that's one of the cool things about being a teacher is I've been able to meet all these different people, understand their experiences, and I think that really changes my perception of people's lives. I also think not assuming is another big thing. Is a lot of times we automatically assume that, oh, you're married to a man because you're a woman, or you look this way, so you're he, him.
Right.
So maybe not always assuming and being open-minded to
and also
others'
not
differences.
assuming that all lesbians are man haters.
Exactly. There's a lot of stereotypes we need to get rid of,
right.
For sure.
Right.
So yeah.
So at the end of each And Good Company program, I ask guests the same 12 questions that French novelist Marcel Proust popularized from a Victorian parlor game. What is your favorite word?
Oh man, I don't know.
I don't think that's your favorite word.
I think just love.
What is your least favorite word?
Dyke, probably. Yeah.
Or that could be another word that you could take back.
Yeah, it could be for some people.
Right.
I don't like it.
Yeah, it's not a nice word. It's like moist.
Yeah, I was about to say moist. I was like, that's too cliche.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
I think just being around other people who have the same desires and just the same energy as me.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
I think being in an area where I'm not feeling like I'm welcomed and feeling hated.
What sound or noise do you love?
My kids' laughter.
What sound or noise do you hate?
I hate the sound of people scratching jeans. Like denim.
That's very specific. Okay. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
A professional philanthropist. If I had the money, I would totally be doing it.
What profession would you not like to do?
I would not want to be a lawyer. It's a lot of reading.
What do you consider your greatest achievement?
I would say my family.
Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
Eleanor Roosevelt.
How would you like to die?
Peacefully in my sleep.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
I did accept you all along.
That's great. Well, thank you for coming to the table, and I really enjoyed our conversation. And I think this is why I've created this show, is to exactly have these type of meaningful conversations, or get people just to start having their own conversations.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I really appreciate you having me on.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And you can learn more about And Good Company and all the other interesting conversations we have had at andgoodcompany.info. And we look forward to next week, when you can again enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company. There you go.
Perfect, thank you.